This is probably like Q1, or are we chasing for?
Good morning or afternoon for some. Thank you for joining the first. Whoops. Hold on one second here. My bad. Thank you for joining our installment of Modern Work Security Series webinars. My name is Lori Martinez, and I'm a Modern Work Solution Specialist here to help moderate and assist with answering your questions. I'm placing a link here in the chat for any feedback so you can let us know how we are doing and offer your suggestions. Your feedback is extremely important to us, so we know how to make these webinars better for you. The past few weeks, we have presented on identity and authentication with Azure AD, some features of our Defender products with Defender for Endpoint and O365. And this week, we are kicking off with mobile device and application management with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. We will be focusing on the Windows management piece, covering topics such as compliance and configuration policies, Autopilot deployment, and how you can partner Azure AD conditional access with device compliance. Today, you have Shay Awajobi and myself helping to moderate, and we have technical specialist Arsalan Ajani presenting over Endpoint Manager. Please feel free to post any questions in the chat, and if you happen to have additional questions or want more information outside of this webinar, please reach out to your dedicated sales specialist or partner. With that, I'm handing it off to Arsalan.
Hello, my name is Arsalan Ajani. I am one of the technical specialists, as Laura mentioned, covering our modern workplace practice, which consists of both our security and collaboration offerings. And today I'm going to be walking you through one of my favorite products, which is Microsoft Endpoint Manager, specifically Intune and how it applies to Windows devices. So I'm going to turn my video off and let's get started. So as the slide states, technology needs are evolving for modern companies. Everyone remembers the good old days when everyone would just have one business-owned device. Everything, including applications, were housed within the corporate environment, and we used a manual process. We didn't need to fix stuff unless it was broken, and everyone called the help desk for everything. Times have and are quickly still changing. Each user in your environment can have multiple devices. These can include the corporate-owned laptops and their personal cell phones that they're using to check emails or Teams. Everyone has SaaS applications in their environment. A mid-sized enterprise company can have an average of 1,100 SaaS applications within their environment, and users are looking for more automation and self-service IT models. And you have to be proactive with things like security updates. This is especially true when you have remote users who are no longer coming into the office or connecting to your on-prem infrastructure. So where does Microsoft Endpoint Manager come in? Microsoft Endpoint Manager consists of both Intune and Configuration Manager. But for the purposes of our conversation today, we are going to be focusing on Intune and the cloud aspect of Microsoft Endpoint Manager as it relates to Windows 10 and 11 devices. Microsoft Intune is a cloud-based service that focuses on mobile device management, MDM, and mobile application management, MAM. And when we say mobile devices, we mean both mobile devices such as cell phones and tablets, but also includes Windows and Mac computers as well. Intune is specifically designed for endpoints, so it's not used to manage servers today. You can, however, use Configuration Manager to manage servers. Intune allows you to control how your organization's devices are used, and you can configure specific policies to control devices and applications. For example, you can set baseline settings on the device, baseline settings that the device must meet to access corporate resources. You can restrict certain settings and deploy applications, Wi-Fi profiles, and VPN configurations, just to name a few things. Intune also allows people in your organization to use their personal devices for school or work. On personal devices, Intune can help make sure that your organization's data stays protected and can even isolate organization data from personal data. Intune also provides native integration with a host of M365 security features such as BitLocker, Windows Hello for Business, and also risk-based controls such as conditional access and app protection policies. It also simplifies management of a variety of devices and allows for zero-touch provisioning of Windows devices through Windows Autopilot. Intune also provides access to a variety of reports and of course integrates with Microsoft Graph API for programmatic access to Intune information for your tenant. Let's talk about licensing, everybody's favorite topic. Besides licensing for Intune, you also need to be licensed for Azure Active Directory P1 due to Intune's reliance on feature set of automatic enrollment and conditional access to grant access to compliant devices. Intune and Azure Active Directory P1 are included in the bundles listed on the screen, and most licenses that include Microsoft Intune also grant the rights to use Microsoft Configuration Manager as long as the subscription remains active. In addition to these bundles, you can also purchase standalone Intune user and device subscriptions. Intune device-only subscriptions are used to manage kiosks, dedicated devices, phone room devices, IoT, and other single-use devices that don't really require a user-based security or management features. Lastly, there is a premium add-on feature in Intune that is not included in any of these bundles, and that feature is Remote Help. Remote Help enables your information and frontline workers to get assistance when needed over a remote connection. With this connection, your support staff can remote connect to the user's device. And during the remote help session, they can view the device's display, and if permitted by the device user, take full control of the device, which enables the helper to directly make configuration changes or take actions directly on the device. So from there, let's move into conditional access. Conditional access brings signals together to make decisions and enforce organizational policies. Conditional access policies at their simplest are if-then statements. So if a user wants access to a resource, then they must complete an action or satisfy a requirement. If you want to learn more about conditional access and everything else that it brings, we have a webinar on Azure Active Directory P1 on our YouTube channel, and you can check that out to go into more detail. I am just going to be focusing on this trusted and compliant devices piece. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to go into my tenant. I'm going to go into Azure Active Directory, security, conditional access, and then I'm going to create a new policy. For the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to select all users and all applications, and then I'm just going to come in here in the grant control. Again, if you want to learn more about everything that conditional access and Azure Active Directory P1 have to offer, please check out that webinar. So what we're concerned about is right here, requiring the devices to be marked as compliant. Essentially, what is happening in this scenario is we're saying all of our users, if they're trying to access all of our cloud applications, we want them to be coming in from a compliant device. So Azure Active Directory is reaching out to Intune to check whether the device is compliant or not. And if it is compliant, they're able to gain access. And if it is not, they are not able to get access until they bring the device under compliance. So let's jump into the Intune platform, and we'll kind of go over what some of these things looks like, and we'll come back to these dashboards. But since we're talking about compliance policies, let's jump in there first. So I'm going to create a new policy. And since we're talking about Windows 10 and 11, I'm going to select that. You can add name, description, and then here we have the compliance settings. So the custom compliance, it isn't public preview, so we're not going to spend too much time on it. But essentially what it does is it expands on Intune's built-in device compliance options. You can add custom compliance settings to compliance policies for managed devices and kind of build out your own custom compliance needs for devices. What comes included in Intune are requiring a device SAT BitLocker, requiring secure boot to be enabled on the device, which is a security feature designed to prevent malicious software from loading when your PC starts up. When the PC starts up, the firmware checks the signature of each piece of boot software, including UEFI firmware drivers, EFI applications, and the operating system. If all of the signatures are valid, the PC boots and the firmware gives control to the operating system. And then code integrity, similar to that, it detects if an unsigned driver or system file is being loaded into the kernel. It also detects if a system file is changed by malicious software or run by a user account with admin privileges. Device properties, you can set minimum and maximum operating system versions here, just to make sure that users have devices that are up to date and or the devices that you're supporting. If you have one-off software, one-off operating systems running to support certain software or applications, you can add those one-off operating systems here. Configuration Manager compliance. So while Configuration Manager is not needed to use Intune by itself, some customers of Microsoft do have a pretty big build out on SCCM and want to continue using that for the compliance functionality. So if you want to do that, you can just require Intune to pull that from Configuration Manager. But again, to use Intune standalone, Configuration Manager is not required. System security, this is where you're kind of setting up some of those security settings for the devices for them to be compliant. So ensuring that there's encryption on the data stores of the device, ensuring that there's firewall running, ensuring that there is a TPM module on the machine, antivirus, anti-software, antivirus, anti-spyware, softwares are running on the machine, and then making sure that there is Defender anti-malware. And then if you're using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, you can also set a threshold for the risk that the machine must be at or below for them to get access. So if it detects a machine and considers the risk high, it'll mark the device as not compliant. And then you have actions for what you want to do if the machine is non-compliant. So we want to immediately mark the machine as non-compliant. And then we want to send an email to the user immediately saying, hey, your device is non-compliant. And all of these email templates are fully customizable. You can add your organization's information in it. You can add your help desk number, anything that you like. And then if you have like a email-based ticketing system, or if you have an admin or a group of admins then you want to assign as additional recipients, so if a device is marked compliant, they get notified. You can do that here. So let's say we send an email to the user immediately, and then we want to send another email to the user 3 days later saying, hey, this is your final warning. After that, we can, after 4 days, we can go ahead and retire the non-compliant device. We will talk more about what retiring means, but essentially in a snapshot, it will take off all corporate data and applications and all of that good stuff off until the user is able to bring their device under compliance and able to log in again. And then you can assign this to either all users or groups of users. You can't assign it to individual users, but you can assign it to groups. And then we just go review and create. This is not pushing out any settings to the device. What it's doing is just checking to make sure that the device meets these minimum thresholds that we have defined to get access to our resources and our applications. So this is kind of like one side of the coin. The other side is configuration profiles, which is actually pushing out settings to the devices. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to come in templates. And one of the ones that I want to highlight is administrative templates. Admin templates are very similar to what GPOs look like. And you can come in here and configure multiple user and computer settings. And we'll also talk about GPOs more in a minute as well. You can also use the configuration profiles to push out things such as Wi-Fi profiles, VPN configuration, a host of certificates to the machine. And I also want to highlight the endpoint protection piece, as that is super important. This is where you can come in and configure things like application guard, Defender firewall, Windows encryption and BitLocker settings, as well as the local device settings, so the user account settings, network access and security, user controls, all of that stuff is done through here. With the amount of settings that are in here, it does seem a little overwhelming at first, but if you go in here, Intune 1 has very great documentation, and 2, everything, it kind of gives you a snapshot of what it looks like, and if you go to learn more, it takes you directly to the documentation that kind of goes into more detail about what exactly you're doing. Some of these settings, when you go on it, it even tells you what the recommended or best practice is for that setting as well. And then again, for configuration profiles, you come in here, you assign to users or groups. We touched on GPOs briefly. GPOs have been around for a really long time and they're super refined. We have something in here called Group Policy Analytics. What this allows you to do is it allows you to migrate some of your GPOs that you have on-prem and into Intune. You just export the XML file off of your on-prem domain controller and you upload it into Intune, and it tells you which one of the GPOs that you have match with what Intune can do. Some of these settings, such as Windows Update, because it's not a policy and there's a whole piece to it, it'll mark that as there's no MDM support, but there's other places within Intune where you can do things like that. Once you have your GPOs in here, you can go to Migrate. You can select which GPOs you want to migrate. And then you create a configuration profile around it. And then you assign it the same way. This makes it fairly easy to be able to, especially for customers that are trying to stop relying on their on-prem infrastructure, to be able to move those GPOs from an on-prem perspective to a cloud perspective. Okay, I just covered a lot of things. Lori, do we have any pressing questions or should I continue?
Checking right. Oh, go for it, Shay.
One question that someone asked is, could you please clarify the statement about Intune needing Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 1 license, please?
Yeah, so you are required to have Azure Active Directory P1 with Intune because it requires some of the things to get devices enrolled into Intune, such as automatic enrollment within Intune and conditional access for compliant devices require that Azure Active Directory piece. A lot of the bundles that Intune comes with also comes with Azure Active Directory P1. Anything else? Or should I continue?
May continue. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we looked at some of the policy pieces. Let's jump into the actual device pieces. So I'm going to go into all devices. And here you can see all of my devices listed, and you can see the device name that it's managed by Intune, whether it's a personal or a corporate device, and whether that device is compliant or not. You can see the operating system on that device and the operating system version. You can also see when they last checked in with Intune and who the primary user is on that device. Once you click into the device, you get additional information about the device. Here, I want to talk about the retire and wipe functionality along with the delete piece. So retire, we touched on it earlier. Essentially, what the retire action does is it removes managed app data, settings, and email profiles that were assigned using Intune. The device is removed from Intune, and that happens the next time the device checks in and receives the retire action. The device will still show up in Intune until the device checks in. And if you want to remove stale devices immediately, it's better to use the delete functionality instead. The big thing to note here about retire is that it leaves the user's personal data on the device. When you have bring your own devices, you do not have the wipe functionality, you only have the retire functionality. What the wipe functionality does is it restores the device to its factory default state. You have the ability of keeping the user data. You can choose whether you want to retain the enrollment state and user account. Otherwise, all data, apps, and settings are removed and it's returned to a factory reset state. So right here, this is where you can kind of select that. Remote lock, so for this doesn't apply to Windows devices. This is more for Macs, iOS, and iPads, cell phone devices. So we're going to cover this piece in a later webinar. Intune syncs with these devices on an ongoing schedule, but you can force a sync by clicking here. You can remotely restart the device, collect diagnostics. Fresh start action removes any applications that are installed on the PC and returns it to just a clean state of Windows. So if you have a laptop that has a lot of bloatware from the OEM, you can do a fresh start and it's going to remove that and have like a clean version of Windows on it. Autopilot reset. We're going to go more into Autopilot and what that entails. But the Autopilot reset takes the device back to a business-ready state and puts it in an out-of-box experience state, which makes it easy for another user to go in, sign in, and kind of get going and start using that PC as their own. You can also run scans on the device. You can update Windows Defender security intelligence. You can rotate BitLocker keys. You can rename the device, and you can also locate the device. And then remote help, which is what I talked about during the licensing. You can use that to remote into these devices as well. That does require the remote help agent, which you can also push out through Intune, and we'll kind of touch on that when we're looking at the application piece. In the properties, you can kind of change whether the device is a corporate-owned device or a personal device. You can change the device name. You can come in here to get some of the hardware details about the device, what applications are running on these devices, and then what compliance, configuration, and app configuration policies are being applied to the device. And then if you're using BitLocker, you can also find or also recover those BitLocker keys here. User experience, device diagnostic, and managed apps is kind of additional reporting that tells you what the endpoint looks like, what the startup performance is, what the application reliability is, and things like that. Just additional information to see how these devices are being used and how well they're working for your end users. That is basically the devices piece and the action that you can take in kind of like a snapshot of it. I also want to touch on the scripts piece. So there is a lot of things that Intune can do. You can additionally use scripts to further extend the functionality that Intune has pre-built into it. Come in here, I'm gonna upload. You can upload the PowerShell script right here and kind of select additional settings of whether you want to run it as the user that's currently logged in, enforce a signature check, or run it in 64-bit PowerShell. Last thing that I want to touch on the devices piece is the Windows update rings. So this is how you push out updates to the devices. Currently, the feature and quality updates are lumped together and pushed out together. There is additional functionality within Intune to push these out separately. However, that is in public preview as of right now. So here you can select whether you want to update the Microsoft products along with the Windows update Windows drivers as well, how long you want to defer it for. And then you can also enable pre-built releases if you are trying to do pilot groups and things like that and select which channel you want to push them out to. You can create as many update rings as you need and assign them to different groups of users. So maybe you want to have IT that is testing out the beta channel, and then you want to create a pilot group of 10% of your organization with the Windows Insider release preview so they can start using it and kind of figure out what might not be working and then push it out to the rest of the organization. Last thing you would want is something to break and then like 100 salespeople reaching out to IT being like, hey, you broke my laptop. You can also configure additional user experience settings here to ensure that the Windows update, restart, and things like that don't interfere with your end users' work. So you can set up additional policies here for them to not having to update or restart during business hours. And then again, you push this out to groups of users. And when the policy is pushed out, you can go into the device status, and it tells you if it succeeded or not, if there were any problems, and all of that good stuff. I am about to move into the managed applications and how to push out applications to Windows devices. Any questions before I do that? Okay, perfect. So besides managing devices and pushing out configuration profiles and testing them against compliance profiles, things like that, you can also use Intune to push out applications to these devices. And there are essentially two main ways of doing that. You can push out applications through any of the stores. In this case, we are focused on the Microsoft Store. And so what you can do for that is flip another tenant. You can go to connectors and tokens, go to Microsoft Store for Business and open up the store. I have it open right here. Let's say that we want to push out OneNote for Windows 10 for our users. I'm going to click Get the App. And then when I come under manage products and services, I have OneNote for Windows 10 here. I'm going to go back. I'm going to sync it. And when that's done, I can come back out to apps, all apps. It looks like it's still syncing. So I'm going to select OneDrive here. You can come out here, you can go into properties, and you can assign the application to users. You can require it, you can have it available, or you can uninstall it. Uninstalling just means as soon as they install that application, it will automatically get uninstalled. Required, it is going to be pushed out to the device, and then available, it's going to be available, and they can go into the Windows Store and download it. And there's OneNote, which we had downloaded just now. That is one way of pushing out applications. You can also, of course, push out M365 applications directly through Intune. You can also push out Edge. You can also push out your own custom and line of business applications. And as long as you have like an installer for it or any of these bundles, you can package them up and upload them into Intune, and then Intune remotely pushes out those applications to your end users. A couple of things to note here is when you are installing an application from the store, it is automatically updated for users when it's updated in store. But if you are custom managing an application, or if it's your line of business applications, things like that, you are required to maintain that application yourself. You do have the ability to update applications. You just upload the new package and kind of let Intune know that, hey, this is we're kind of amending this application using the new installer instead. And so those are the two ways of pushing out applications through Intune and kind of how to maintain them. I know I covered a lot of things, and I want to now talk about Autopilot. Before I do, any questions on this applications piece? Okay, great. Let's talk about Windows Autopilot. Okay, so Windows Autopilot kind of goes into how we can automatically or use low-touch provisioning for Windows devices. So currently, how devices are deployed in a typical IT environment today is we get the device, we buy the device from our manufacturer. Different devices have different hardware configurations, and every company has like security and compliance standard that requires certain builds for certain devices. IT has to image and reimage these devices in line with those company requirements, and they also have to do the upkeep and maintenance on those images, which everybody loves to do. That was a joke. Nobody loves to do it because it's very taxing and requires a lot of resources. You then have to get these machines joined to Azure Active or to Active Directory so that you can apply your first layer of security in group policy objects, device restriction, and also, of course, to allow your end users to be able to log into these devices. Then you have to get these devices onboarded to an endpoint manager solution such as SCCM or Intune so that you can get the correct applications and security updates deployed to these devices or machines. Then you have to get the device onboarded to an endpoint protection solution, whether that is your antivirus or an EDR solution. And then the machine is finally ready to be handed off and shipped out to the user. This is the process of transitioning a factory state device into a business ready state device. This is a very high touch approach and requires us to deploy multiple resources on-prem. What Autopilot does is it helps you automate this process with minimal IT admin intervention. You might actually be at a place where this process is semi-automated within your organization, which it is possible with MDT. But even then, we must think about the scalability and the reliability of that solution, because it does require you to deploy and maintain a lot of on-prem infrastructure. So let's see what Windows Autopilot looks like in comparison to what we just looked at. So the IT admin will set up an Autopilot profile in Intune. Intune will sync with the Windows Autopilot service. And then your hardware vendor, you will let them know that, hey, this is an Autopilot device, and they'll be able to upload the device hash into the Autopilot service. The Autopilot service will sync that with your Intune tenant, and then the hardware vendor will go ahead and ship that device directly out to your end user. The end user receives the device, turns it on, connects it to the internet, logs in with their corporate credential, and boom, Autopilot. All of your configuration profiles, your settings that you have outlined in Intune, as well as the applications, get pushed out to the device, and the user is ready to be using that device from as soon as they receive it, and it does not require you to upkeep images or do all of that, because it's kind of coming in a layered approach, kind of what we looked at with configuration profiles, your security settings being pulled from Intune, as well as the application deployment piece. So there are certain Autopilot scenarios and kind of way of doing things. First, you have the user-driven mode, which has both an Azure AD join as well as a hybrid Azure AD join. So Azure AD join essentially means that this computer is only joined to Azure AD. These devices can still maintain single sign-on access to on-prem resources when they're on the organization's network. Devices that are Azure AD join can still authenticate to on-prem servers like File, Print, and other applications. Hybrid Azure AD join devices are for if your environment has an on-prem AD footprint and you also want to benefit from the capabilities provided by Azure Active Directory. You can implement hybrid Azure AD joint devices. These devices are joined to your on-prem Active Directory and registered with your Azure Active Directory. Some of the use cases for this are if you have Win32 applications deployed that rely on Active Directory machine authentication, or if you want to continue to use GPOs that you already have to manage the device and are unable to migrate them. If you want to continue to support older devices in addition to Windows 10, and with Windows hybrid Azure AD join devices, you need to ensure that the device has a line of sight to the domain controller. If your users are remote, we can configure the hybrid Azure AD join process to skip the connectivity check. This won't eliminate the need to talk to Active Directory domain controller. Instead, what it will do is allow Intune to deliver the needed VPN configurations before the user attempts to sign into Windows, thus providing that connectivity and line of sight into your network. The self-deploying mode is used mainly for kiosks, digital signages, and things like that. For the self-deploying mode, it does not ask for AD credentials in the out-of-box experience and joins automatically. Windows Autopilot for existing devices offers an upgrade path to Windows Autopilot for existing Windows 7 and Windows 8 devices. And then finally, the Windows Autopilot for pre-provisioned deployment is essentially white gloves partners or IT staff can pre-provision Windows 10 PCs to be fully configured and business ready for an org or user. Essentially what they're doing is they're going through and setting up the device with org-wide policies, settings, applications, and then when the user logs in, it's even faster because they are only setting up their own policies and their own user applications and things like that. So let's go back into the tenant to see what it kind of looks like and what we have to do to set up Autopilot. So I'm going to come in here into Enroll Devices. And I'm going to go to Deployment Profiles. When your hardware vendor uploads the device hash to your tenant, this is where that would show up. So I'm going to Deployment Profiles, Windows PC. Convert all targeted devices to Autopilot. What this means is that if you already have like an enrolled device and this Autopilot profile is assigned to a user, next time that device resets or you reset the device, it'll go through that out-of-box experience that an Autopilot device was without it having to have previously been an Autopilot device, without it having to have the hash uploaded to your tenant and anything like that. So deployment mode here is where we configure whether it's user-driven or self-deploying. Again, self-deploying is for kiosks, digital signages, things like that. And then here we can configure whether it's Azure AD joined or hybrid Azure AD joined. If we select hybrid Azure AD, this is where we can skip that initial connectivity check until we deploy the VPN configuration. Microsoft licensing term and privacy settings, essentially you as an organization are accepting this. So if you want to hide or show it to the end user, you can select that here. You can select whether the users have like a change account option when they are first log in, as well as what type of account will be configured on the device, whether it's a standard account or an admin account. This is the pre-provisioned / white glove / IT partner that we talked about, where they're going in and setting up the device before the user. You can also select the language, as well as automatically configure the keyboard settings. And then if you are only joining Azure AD joined, then you can apply a device name template. But if you are doing hybrid Azure AD join, then that is pulled from the domain controller. Here you go ahead and assign this to groups, and then you go ahead and create. Something that kind of goes hand in hand with the deployment profiles is the enrollment status page. So here you can configure what is happening during that out-of-box experience, and this will make a lot more sense when we look at the out-of-box experience next. So if it's been more than 60 minutes, then show an error, what the custom message you want it to be. You can include your IT help desk, as well as the IT admin's information for the user to reach out to. Enable log collections diagnostics, block all devices until all applications and profiles are installed. This is very beneficial. This and the block device use until the required apps are installed. Useful because you don't want the user to have access to the machine before it is fully provisioned, just because that'll allow them to circumvent some of the settings and things like that. And then again, you assign this to groups, and you can add tags if you need, and you review and create. With the enrollment status page and the deployment profile, essentially you just have to create that for your users, and then the configuration profiles that are kind of configured to them, that are applied to them, will push out after this. So will the applications, and that way you'll have a user who, without IT having to touch these individual devices, they'll be able to turn on their device that they got directly from the manufacturer, turn it on, log in, and it'll be in that business ready state. So let's look at real quickly what this looks like from an end user perspective. So here the user is going in, they are selecting their region, they are selecting their keyboard layout, which we saw that you can configure for them beforehand. You can hide that setting. This is pulling your organization's branding via Azure Active Directory. Now the device is reaching out to your Intune tenant to make sure that you do have the correct licensing for Intune for this to be able to work. And now it's starting to pull in those settings, the configuration profiles, as well as the applications. It is applying the user settings, user applications, things like that. You can see here through one of the configuration profiles, OneDrive was signed in and now it's syncing with it. And you see that the device is ready. This is what we call the out-of-box experience. The user can go in, sign in, and go through this experience straight out of the box. And when their computer turns on, they have all of their applications. You can see that the Office applications were installed. A configuration profile that was syncing their documents with their OneDrive has been applied. And so what this allows IT to do is be able to maintain and mass provision these devices without having to maintain golden images and things like that. And essentially on the end user side, they are able to get their device directly from the manufacturer, turn it on, and quickly be able to use their device as well as be productive from day one. And that is all I had for you. Lori, back to you, unless there are some questions.
Thanks, Arsalan. That was really great. Hold on one second here while I get my bearings. All right, so thank you for the great presentation, Arsalan. It was super informative. Presentation and the demo was great. At this time, I'd like to point out that these are some of the upcoming webinars that we have scheduled. The next one will be the second part of Endpoint Manager with the focus on iOS and Android devices. I'll be placing the registration link in the chat if you'd like to register for any of the additional webinars that we have. I believe after Endpoint Manager, there's also DLP and Defender for Cloud Apps. And then since we do have a few minutes left, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat again. We'll take them one by one, and I'll be hanging out for a few minutes to help answer, what might come up here. I do know that I have some case studies to also place in the chat here, but I'm just watching it. Is REI, which should be familiar for some of us. And Atos, which also work to protect some of their endpoints as well. And some of these also are in reference to other services and features that we do have at Microsoft. For example, REI is also in relation to the Surface Hub. So if there's any hardware recommendations or requirements that you guys are looking for as well, that's a really cool little case study to look up into. And Shay did post the feedback form earlier in the broadcast here. Oh, I see one question. Bear with me one sec while I get that. Ramon, will the webinar be available offline? Yes, actually, since you're here in the webinar, you can go back into the live link after this is done, and you can see the presentation just like this. So it's the recording that you can play back. If you don't want to do it through Teams as well, we will be posting the recording on our YouTube channel as well. Let me post that here. And also, Ramon, just to let you know, I will be following up with your question about being able to change the frequency of the the devices and how often they check for compliance. I didn't see anything that can be done within the admin portal or within the Endpoint Manager portal, but I'm just going to double check internally to see if there's even maybe a PowerShell script that can be done for that, but I'll be following up with you offline. I'm going to add one more case study here. Whoops. This one is Tower. And I'm just going to leave this, probably going to give us another 1 or 2 minutes here just for any additional questions. And the silence is awkward, isn't it? I'm going to give it probably another couple of seconds, but it does seem like everybody's answered or asked the questions that they do have while they're on here. So since we're coming up towards the end of the hour, we'll be concluding the session. Again, the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel that I posted in the chat. And of course, you can go back into the live link that you clicked on in order to join the live webinar. The recording will also be available there as well. And again, if there's additional questions that you have, or maybe you require more information, please reach out to your Microsoft's representative, specialist, or the preferred partner that you do work with. And with that said, because I don't see, oh, actually, we do have one more question. Let's see. The question is, in a hybrid scenario, which group policies take precedence over the other, Intune versus on-prem? Arsalan, do you happen to know what that would be?
Let me dig up the documentation on it. I think it would try to apply both and it will go with the most restrictive, but let me just confirm that.
Okay. Do you want to follow back up and I can, or do you want to look for that now, or do you want to follow up with this particular user?
I can follow up.
Okay. It's anonymous, so if you send me a private message, or if you just ask the send me, if you're comfortable with that, sending me your email address or even your first and last name if you registered, so that way I can make sure to have us follow up with your question.
Just to get additional clarity for that question, is the customer, are you currently using, to the person who asked, are you currently using SCCM to manage any of those devices? Or is it fully, how are you currently managing those devices at this time?
Let's see, I put something in here. So I think, Shay, we probably do need to gather just some more information around this particular question, and we can follow up with their answer. I will send them my email address and have them email me, and then I can get some additional clarification from them and then send them the answer for that. And just for our information too, Shay, they added that they are not using SCCM to manage the devices. It's more of a traditional method through VPN than GP update, group policy update.
Yeah, so I think what happens in that when like there is a conflict, the domain level group policy would take precedence over Intune policies unless the PC can't sign in to the domain. And then if they're not able to sign into the domain, then the Intune policies would take precedence.
I'll still follow up. I gave them, I sent them my email address. So anonymous, I don't know your name, I apologize. But if you send me an email, we can follow up through email and help you out there. Or even route you to, if there's a Microsoft representative that you might have here. But with that, it does look like we do have a few more minutes. If there are any additional questions, happy to stay on. All right. Looks like you're welcome. All right, guys, so it looks like there's no more questions then. If you review this later, when you're watching the recording, or you pass it on and you come up with more questions after you process the information that Arsalan provided, then if you, again, have more questions, please reach out to your partner or your Microsoft representative. And with that, we do want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. We had a great time, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.